In 2023, a remotely operated vehicle penetrated compartments of the RMS Titanic that had remained sealed since April 15, 1912. The footage captured in these lower decks contradicted assumptions held by maritime archaeologists for over a century. What the drone's cameras recorded in the third-class quarters and cargo holds was not dramatic. It was specific. It fundamentally changed how we understand what happened in the final 18 minutes before the ship disappeared beneath the North Atlantic. The ship that couldn't sink, the RMS Titanic, departed Southampton on April 10, 1912, carrying 2,224 passengers and crew. The White Star Line had marketed the vessel as practically unsinkable, a claim based on its 16 watertight compartments separated by 15 bulkheads. The engineering logic was straightforward. The ship could survive flooding in 4 compartments. Any accident severe enough to breach more than 4 compartments was considered statistically impossible. The iceberg that struck Titanic's starboard side at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th created a different problem than engineers had anticipated. The collision did not tear a massive gash in the hull. It produced a series of narrow slits and separated hull plates across 6 compartments, extending roughly 250 feet along the ship's length. Water entered at approximately 7 tons per second. For 111 years, our understanding of Titanic's final hours came from 3 sources: survivor testimony, which was limited to what people experienced on the upper decks; sonar mapping of the wreck site, which provided external dimensions and debris patterns; and earlier submersible expeditions, which photographed the exterior and accessible interior spaces like the grand staircase and first-class cabins. No expedition had accessed the sealed lower decks, the third-class quarters in the bow section, the cargo holds, the crew areas below E deck. These spaces had been considered too dangerous for exploration. The structural integrity of the wreck was compromised. The passages were narrow, and there was an ethical question about disturbing what many considered a gravesite. But technology changes what is possible. By 2023, remotely operated vehicles had advanced to the point where they could navigate spaces too confined or unstable for manned submersibles. The drones were smaller, their cameras had better resolution in low light, and they could be directed through openings barely 18 inches wide. The expedition that deployed these remotely operated vehicles was not motivated by spectacle. It was part of a comprehensive documentation effort before the wreck deteriorates beyond recognition. Saltwater and iron-eating bacteria are consuming the hull at an accelerating rate. Sections that were intact in the 1980s have collapsed. The bathroom fixtures on B deck disintegrated between 2005 and 2010. Maritime archaeologists concluded they had perhaps 15 years to document what remains before the wreck becomes an unrecognizable debris field. Preservation was the priority. The lower deck penetration was approved under strict protocols. The drones would not disturb or remove any artifacts. They would document existing conditions without physical contact. The footage would be analyzed by historians, engineers, and forensic specialists before any conclusions were announced publicly. What they found was not what anyone expected. A century of darkness. The bow section of Titanic rests at a depth of 12,500 feet, embedded at an angle in the Atlantic seabed. The impact when it struck bottom was violent enough to drive the keel 60 feet into the sediment. This burial created a preservation effect. While the upper decks have been stripped by currents and biological activity, the lower levels remain sealed in cold water with minimal oxygen, slowing decay. But sealed does not mean empty. When Titanic sank, it took everything down with it: furniture, luggage, food stores, personal belongings, the ship's safe containing passenger valuables, and an estimated $200,000 in currency and jewelry. And people. More than 1,500 bodies went down with the vessel. Most of those bodies are gone now. At depth, in cold water with low oxygen, decomposition happens slowly but completely. Bones dissolve. Fabrics disintegrate. What remains are the items that do not decay. Leather shoes, arranged in pairs on the ocean floor, marking where someone came to rest. Ceramic dishes, glass bottles, metal objects, rust marks many surfaces. Previous expeditions photographed these artifacts on the seafloor and inaccessible cabins. They documented the debris field between the bow and stern sections, where heavier objects fell straight down as the ship broke apart. They mapped where boilers, coal, and hull plates landed. They created detailed three-dimensional models of the wreck site. Yet they had not seen inside the locked third-class cabins, the cargo holds where luggage and freight were stored, or the crew quarters where firemen and stewards slept between shifts. These areas had remained dark for more than a century. The 2023 expedition deployed 3 remotely operated vehicles over 12 dives. The drones were equipped with LED lighting systems that could illuminate the underwater environment without generating heat that might damage fragile structures. Their cameras captured 4K video with minimal latency, allowing operators on the support vessel to navigate in real time. The first penetration targeted the third-class quarters in the bow, specifically the cabins along Scotland Road, the main corridor running the length of E-deck. This passageway had served as the primary route for crew and third-class passengers moving between the stern and the bow. On the night of the sinking, it would have been one of the paths people used trying to reach the upper decks. The remotely operated vehicle entered through a collapsed section of the hull, threading through twisted metal into the corridor. The lights revealed what you would expect in a space that had been underwater for 111 years: rust, sediment, deterioration. The wooden paneling had mostly dissolved. Electrical fixtures hung from degraded mounts. Pipes that once carried fresh water had corroded into unrecognizable shapes, but the cabin doors were still there. Most were closed. The operators made a decision. They would document one cabin. They selected a door that appeared structurally stable, in a section where the hull showed minimal buckling. The remotely operated vehicle's manipulator arm turned the corroded handle. The door opened inward. What the camera revealed inside that cabin changed the historical record. The technology behind the mission, the remotely operated vehicle that entered Titanic's lower decks, was not designed for deep-sea archaeology. It was adapted from industrial inspection drones used to examine underwater pipelines and oil rig infrastructure. The modifications made for the Titanic mission included enhanced lighting, higher resolution cameras, and a specialized manipulator arm capable of precise movements in tight spaces. The drone measured 36 inches long and 18 inches wide, small enough to fit through openings that would be impossible for a manned submersible. It weighed 95 pounds in air, but was neutrally buoyant at depth, meaning it neither sank nor floated. This allowed operators to navigate through the wreck without creating currents that might disturb sediment or damage fragile structures. The control system used a fiber optic tether that transmitted commands to the ROV and returned video feed to the surface. At 12,500 feet, the signal delay was negligible, about 0.03 seconds. This responsiveness was critical when navigating through confined spaces filled with obstacles. A delayed reaction could result in collision damage or getting the drone stuck. The lighting system was the most significant technical challenge. At depth, natural light does not penetrate. Everything is absolute darkness. Previous expeditions had used high-intensity lights that allowed for clear photography, but generated heat and could disturb marine life or accelerate corrosion. The new system used LED arrays, calibrated to produce maximum illumination with minimal thermal output. The cameras captured video at 3,840 pixels by 2,160 pixels, significantly higher resolution than earlier documentation efforts. This level of detail allowed analysts to identify objects and read text on artifacts that would have been indistinguishable in lower quality footage. Each dive lasted between 6 and 9 hours. The ROV was deployed from a surface vessel positioned directly above the wreck site. Weather conditions had to be nearly perfect. Surface waves could not exceed 4 feet. Wind could not exceed 15 knots. These constraints limited the expedition to a narrow window in late summer when North Atlantic conditions are most stable. The operators worked in shifts, monitoring multiple screens showing the ROV's camera feed, its position relative to the wreck, depth readings, battery levels, and tether tension. Communication between the pilot and the navigation specialist was constant. Every movement was deliberate. There was no room for improvisation. The decision to enter sealed cabins required approval from a committee that included marine archaeologists, structural engineers, and representatives from the families of Titanic victims. The ethical considerations were substantial. These were private spaces. People had died there. The objects inside belonged to individuals who never intended for them to be cataloged or photographed. But the alternative was letting those objects disappear. The wreck is deteriorating. In another 20 years, the cabins will collapse. Whatever is inside will be scattered across the ocean floor. Context destroyed. The committee concluded that documentation now, with minimal physical contact, was preferable to losing the information entirely. The ROV entered 7 cabins across 4 dives. What it found was consistent and completely unexpected. Entering the Forbidden Zone. The first cabin the ROV documented was third-class accommodation number 47, located on E-deck, approximately 130 feet from the bow. The door opened into a room measuring roughly 8 feet by 10 feet. Based on White Star Line deck plans, this cabin would have housed up to 4 passengers in 2 bunk beds. The bunks were still there. Visible beneath sediment and rust, the metal frames remained attached to the wall mounts. The mattresses had decomposed, but the springs were intact. On the lower bunk to the left, the camera revealed a leather suitcase. This was not surprising. Survivors reported that many passengers had gone back to their cabins to retrieve luggage after the collision. What was surprising was that the suitcase was closed and latched. Elsewhere in the cabin, other objects had been preserved by the cold, dark water. A pair of men's boots sat on the floor. A ceramic pitcher rested on what remained of a washstand. A wool coat hung from a hook on the door, the fabric partially intact where it had been protected from water flow. The ROV's camera documented these items without touching them. The footage was transmitted to the surface, where a team of historians immediately began comparing what they saw with passenger manifests and survivor accounts. The second cabin showed a similar pattern. A closed suitcase lay on the bunk. Personal items were arranged as if the occupants had expected to return. A shaving kit sat on the washstand. Shoes were lined up beneath the bunk. A child's doll rested on a pillow. This repeated across all 7 cabins. The remotely operated vehicle, the ROV, entered. In each case, the space showed signs of hurried departure, but not panic. A surprising calm. Belongings were left behind, yet arranged with a kind of organization that suggested people thought they would be coming back. The historical assumption had been that third-class passengers struggled to reach the boat deck because gates separating the classes were locked. Survivor testimony supported this. Several witnesses reported being blocked by locked gates or by crew members directing them away from first-class areas. The narrative that emerged was one of systematic discrimination that cost lives. The cabin footage complicated that narrative, not because it disproved the testimony, but because it added detail that testimony could not provide. The objects in those cabins told a story about what people prioritized in the moments after the collision. They had taken time to organize their belongings, to close and latch suitcases, to arrange items carefully. This suggested they did not understand the severity of the situation, or they had been told something that made them think the ship was stable. The ROV's exploration of the cargo holds added another layer. These cargo spaces, located in the forward section below the third-class quarters, had been loaded with freight and passenger luggage that was too large to keep in cabins. The holds were massive spaces, difficult to navigate, even with the ROV's maneuverability. The footage revealed stacks of steamer trunks, wooden crates marked with shipping labels, and canvas bags containing mail. Everything was covered in sediment, but the arrangement showed order. Items were still secured where they had been loaded in Southampton. There was no evidence of people trying to access luggage or retrieve valuables. No signs of the chaos you would expect if passengers had flooded into these spaces looking for their belongings. What the camera revealed was something no one anticipated. But to understand why it mattered, you need to understand what was supposed to be there. The RMS Titanic's cargo manifest listed 12,000 items, ranging from machinery parts and textiles to food stores and personal luggage. Some of these items were valuable. A jeweled copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, bound in 1,500 precious stones. A Renault Type CB Coupe de Ville automobile. 50 cases of toothpaste. 76 cases of dragon's blood, a resin used in manufacturing. What interested the expedition team was not the valuable cargo. It was the mundane items, specifically the crew's personal belongings and the ship's operational supplies. When the ROV navigated into the crew quarters below E-deck, it documented spaces that had never been photographed. The fireman's dormitory, where the men who shoveled coal into the boilers slept between shifts. The steward's quarters, where cabin staff stored their uniforms and personal items. The storage rooms where spare linens, dishes, and cleaning supplies were kept. In the fireman's quarters, the camera revealed rows of narrow bunks, similar to third-class accommodations but more cramped. On the bunks and in small lockers, the ROV documented personal items, photographs in frames, letters, small tools, a harmonica. These were the belongings of men who worked in the bowels of the ship, feeding coal into furnaces that generated the steam to drive the engines. What was absent was as significant as what was present. There was no evidence of emergency equipment, no life vests stored in accessible locations, no posted instructions for reaching the boat deck. The crew in these lower sections would have had further to travel than anyone else to reach safety, and they had no equipment pre-positioned to help them survive if they could not make it topside. The ship's storage areas told a different story about Titanic's operational reality. White Star Line had marketed the vessel as the pinnacle of luxury and safety. The footage showed something more complicated. In supply rooms, the ROV documented shortcuts and cost-saving measures. Lower-grade materials stored alongside premium items. Mismatched dishes. Linens of varying quality. These were not safety issues only. They suggested that the ship's actual operations did not always match its public image. But the most significant discovery was in Cargo Hold 2, located in the forward section approximately 80 feet from the point where the iceberg struck. This hold had been loaded with freight including machinery, textiles, and parcels destined for New York. The ROV's lights revealed that some of the cargo crates had broken open, their contents scattered across the hold. This was expected. The impact of the collision and the ship's descent would have shifted cargo violently. What was not expected was what some of those crates contained. Maritime shipping regulations in 1912 required that certain types of cargo be declared and stored according to specific protocols. Flammable materials had to be isolated. Heavy items needed proper securing. Fragile goods required protective packing. The broken crates in Hold 2 contained materials that should have been declared as hazardous. They included industrial chemicals used in manufacturing processes, pressurized containers, and materials that, in the wrong conditions, could be volatile. None of these items appeared on the public cargo manifest. That was not illegal. Shipping companies often transported industrial materials without detailed public disclosure, but it raised questions about whether the crew was fully informed about what the ship carried. If the cargo handlers did not know they were working with hazardous materials, standard safety protocols might not have been followed. The remotely operated vehicle also documented something that had been rumored but never confirmed. In a corner of Hold 2, partially buried in sediment, were stacks of ammunition boxes. The boxes held commercial ammunition, likely destined for sporting goods retailers in the United States. That was not illegal, and it was not secret. It was significant because it confirmed that Titanic carried explosives, even in small quantities. None of this changed the fundamental story of why Titanic sank. The iceberg damage was catastrophic, No cargo, regardless of composition, contributed to the sinking, but the footage provided context about how ships actually operated in 1912 versus how they were portrayed to the public. The objects left behind. The remotely operated vehicle's cameras captured hundreds of personal items in the lower decks. Each one represented a decision someone made on the night of April 14, 1912. What to take, what to leave behind, what they thought mattered. In third-class cabin 62, the camera documented a complete place setting on a small table, a plate, a cup, silverware, and a folded napkin. Next to the plate was a pocket watch, stopped at 2:17 in the morning. That was not the time the ship sank. The ship sank at 2:20 in the morning, but the watch was close. The watch stopped when water reached it, a few minutes before the bow section flooded completely. In another cabin, children's toys, a wooden top, a cloth ball, a small slate with chalk marks still visible. These belonged to third-class families traveling in steerage, children who would have been unaware of what the journey represented beyond an adventure. The crew quarters contained different objects, work tools, extra uniform buttons, and sewing kits for repairs. There were personal items too. A diary in a fireman's locker, water damaged but partially legible. Photographs tucked into bunk frames. Evidence that even in utilitarian spaces below decks, people created small areas of personal identity. The most difficult footage came from a storage area adjacent to the third-class dining room, used to hold luggage too large for cabins. The remotely operated vehicle's lights revealed dozens of items, still labeled with their owners' names and destinations. A steamer trunk was marked for a Swedish family traveling to Winnipeg. The father, mother, and 5 children all perished. The trunk contained everything they owned for starting a new life. Maritime archaeology has protocols for discoveries like this. Document without disturbing, record context, analyze with respect for the human dimension. The team followed these protocols. No objects were touched. The remotely operated vehicle's cameras simply recorded what was there. The expedition team made a decision about public release. Images of cabin interiors and cargo holds would be shared with researchers and archived for historical access. Footage showing clearly readable names on personal items would remain restricted. Families of Titanic victims would be notified about discoveries related to their ancestors and given the option to view relevant footage privately. This approach balanced historical documentation with individual privacy. It acknowledged that while Titanic is a subject of public fascination, the people who died were real individuals with families who still feel connected to their memory. What we now understand. The footage from Titanic's lower decks did not reveal a hidden scandal or rewrite the basic facts of the disaster. The iceberg damage was still catastrophic. The lifeboat shortage still cost lives. The structural failure of the bulkheads still sealed the ship's fate. What changed was precision. Before the remotely operated vehicle penetration, historians relied on survivor accounts to understand what happened in the third-class sections during the sinking. Those accounts were valuable but incomplete. Survivors from third class were predominantly young, able-bodied passengers who made it to the boat deck. They represented less than 25% of the third-class CDBA manifest. Their testimony described the barriers they encountered, the confusion, the difficulty reaching the upper decks. But they could not describe what happened in the cabins and corridors they left behind. The cabin footage provided the missing perspective. Closed suitcases, organized personal items, a coat hanging on a door. These details indicated that passengers in those specific cabins left believing they would return. They did not pack in panic. They did not ransack their belongings, looking for valuables. They stepped out, perhaps to investigate the disturbance, perhaps because a crew member told them to proceed to the boat deck, and they expected their possessions would still be there when they came back. This changes how we understand the information flow during the crisis. If passengers in the lower decks during the first 30 minutes after the collision did not grasp the severity, it means the communication from crew to passengers was either delayed or understated. Several survivors reported being told the damage was minor, that the ship was in no danger, that they were going on deck as a precaution. The cabin evidence supports those accounts. People behaved like they were responding to a drill, not an emergency. The cargo hold documentation provided something different. For a century, the Titanic's cargo was known primarily from the manifest submitted to customs authorities. That manifest was accurate for declared items, but incomplete. The industrial chemicals and pressurized containers found in Hold 2 were not secret, but they were not publicly disclosed in detail. This was standard practice in 1912. Commercial shipping protected proprietary information about clients and cargo. But from a safety perspective, the presence of these materials raised questions about crew training. If cargo handlers did not know they were loading potentially hazardous materials, they might not have followed the securing protocols those materials required. This likely did not contribute to the sinking, but it provided insight into operational practices that historians had previously only inferred from regulations and general shipping procedures. The ammunition boxes confirmed what researchers had suspected but could not verify. Titanic carried small arms ammunition as commercial cargo. Not unusual, not illegal. American sporting goods stores imported ammunition from British manufacturers regularly. Conspiracy theories about Titanic being a munition ship had circulated for decades, fueled by incomplete information. The remotely operated vehicle footage showed exactly what was there: standard commercial ammunition in quantities consistent with normal trade. Not weapons, not military explosives. The kind of cargo you would find on any transatlantic liner. The structural documentation will have the most lasting research value. The expedition team used the remotely operated vehicle cameras to capture detailed measurements of hull deterioration, bulkhead integrity, and deck collapse patterns. By comparing this 2023 footage to surveys conducted in the 1980s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, engineers can calculate the rate of decay with much greater accuracy. The data shows that corrosion is accelerating. Rusticles, the icicle-like formations created by iron-eating bacteria consuming the hull, have increased in density by approximately 30% since 2010. Structural members that showed minimal degradation in the 1990s have failed completely. The bathroom fixtures that were intact during Robert Ballard's 1985 discovery expedition are gone. The grand staircase railing collapsed sometime between 2005 and 2012. Based on these deterioration rates, structural engineers predict the bow section will experience major collapse within 12 to 18 years. The upper decks will cave into the lower levels. The hull will compress further into the seabed. What remains recognizable as a ship will become a debris field with isolated components, similar to how the stern section appears now. This timeline gave urgency to the documentation effort. The 2023 expedition captured footage of spaces that will not exist in accessible form within 2 decades. Future researchers will not be able to verify what the remotely operated vehicle cameras recorded. They will have to trust that the documentation was thorough and accurate. The expedition team addressed this by implementing redundant recording systems. Every dive was captured by 3 separate cameras at different angles. The footage was reviewed by independent analysts who verified that objects were documented from multiple perspectives. Measurements were cross-referenced using laser scaling systems. The result is an archive that meets evidentiary standards for historical research. That archive is now held at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, and the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic in Halifax. Access is restricted to credentialed researchers, but the footage will eventually be digitized for public viewing once privacy protocols are finalized. The privacy questions remain complex. The expedition documented personal items bearing names, addresses, and in some cases legible text from letters and documents. Releasing this material publicly would violate the privacy of individuals who never consented to documentation, even though they died in 1912. Their descendants have legal and ethical claims to how their ancestors' belongings are presented. The solution involves 2 tiers of access. Researchers can view the complete footage under confidentiality agreements. They can publish findings and analysis, but cannot reproduce images showing personally identifiable information without family consent. Public access will be granted to edited versions where names and addresses are redacted digitally. The precedent is clear in other maritime archaeology projects. The CSS Hunley excavation, the Mary Rose recovery, and the Vasa preservation all developed protocols for handling personal artifacts from historical disasters. The Titanic footage follows those established frameworks. The expedition team is recommended against future remotely operated vehicle penetration of sealed spaces. The 2023 mission documented 7 cabins and 3 cargo areas. This provides sufficient data for comparative analysis. Further exploration would risk damaging fragile structures without yielding proportional research value. Instead, future efforts will focus on exterior documentation using advanced photogrammetry to create 3-dimensional models of the entire wreck site. These models can be updated every 5 years to track deterioration. Eventually, when the physical wreck has degraded beyond recognition, the digital models will preserve what existed in the early 21st century. What the drone filmed wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was meant to be accurate. The closed suitcases, the organized belongings, the cargo secured exactly where it was loaded, the gradual deterioration of metal and wood and fabric. These details do not change the fundamental story of Titanic, but they add specificity that testimony and sonar mapping could never provide. In 15 to 20 years, those lower decks will collapse. The cabins will compress. The cargo holds will fill with sediment. The objects the ROV documented will be scattered or buried. This footage will be the only record of what existed 111 years after the sinking, before the ocean finished reclaiming what belonged to it. History is not changed by what the camera found, but it is clarified, made more specific, more honest, and that precision matters. Not because it is dramatic, because it is true.